volunteer here at Shiloh National Military Park, and had the good fortune to be a seasonal ranger here a few years ago. Now I make my bread up in Chicago, Illinois, buying, selling, and trading paper, documents, rare books about President Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War and the U.S. presidency. I work for a firm called Abraham Lincoln Bookshop up there, and so most of my history work gets done inside. Going over manuscripts, going over diaries, looking at signatures, looking at Lincoln letters and documents and things like that. So once a year I get to come outside. Once a year they let me go outside. And that's when I get to go to Shiloh and talk about the Battle of April 6th and 7th, 1862. Sometimes they make me come out early, like yesterday, and like today. So it takes a little time for the juices to start flowing. But I seem to recall that this morning's program is supposed to be about General Braxton Bragg and his defense of the western side of the battlefield on the morning of April 7th, 1862. It might bear a little bit of background on the previous day's battle. Of course, as we probably all know the broad strokes, but I'm going to hit them anyway in case we have anybody who's a little bit new. On the morning of April 6, 1862, General Albert Sidney Johnston, commanding an army of 44,500 Confederates, having marched up from Corinth, attacked General Ulysses S. Grant and his Army of the Tennessee in its camps here around Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee. The attack was successful to an extent, drove the leading divisions of Grant's army from their camps in the morning of April 6th. Through the afternoon of April 6th, they drove General Grant's army steadily toward Pittsburgh Landing. But unfortunately, that was counter to the battle plan. They were supposed to be turning the left flank of the enemy, driving them away from Pittsburgh Landing. The reason why that didn't happen as planned, well, we talked about that yesterday. But by the evening of April 6th, the Confederate Army had come up against the last Union line. They'd captured the 2,250 prisoners at Hornet's Nest, and the Confederate Army was thoroughly disorganized, thoroughly exhausted, and without their original commanding officer, General Johnston, having been killed on the afternoon of April 6th. The new commander, General P.G.T. Beauregard. Confederates withdrew from their forwardmost position and withdrew to many of the Union camps to camp that night. Now they did this without any method. They did this without any plan. They did this without any of their formations, any of their large formations being together. Characteristic of the first day of the battle was that the Confederate brigades were detached and sent all over the battlefield in response to various emergencies. Larger Confederate organizations did not hold together, and they did not do the missions that you would normally assign to a larger organization. There are very few, no Confederate divisions work entirely together. Only one is together for any practical purpose, Confederate division commanders are, to some extent, nobodies in the story of Shiloh. They contribute as file closers, and they inspire people to get up into the line, but their role of commanding 2 or 3 brigades, coordinating them and sending them forward together is pretty much nil. Confederate High Command takes a lot of personal attention to keeping the Confederate Army going forward and attacking on the first day of the battle. And that is the reason why at the end of that day of battle, the Confederate Army is badly disorganized. No commander knows who is on his front or who is on his left. No commander really knows who is giving him orders. During the course of the day, the Confederate High Command gave the 4 senior commanders, divided up the battlefield by geography. So suddenly in the middle of the battle, junior commanders are receiving orders from somebody they maybe know, maybe don't know, and maybe they don't know whether they should be taking orders from this person. So the result at the end of the day is that those troops draw off, most of them at brigade size or smaller. Most of those brigades badly diminished by battle casualties and straggling. Some of the brigades that we're going to talk about on April 7th are going to have maybe 800 or 1,000 men in them, maybe less than that. Maybe they're the size of a regiment when they had 1,500 or 2,000 men on the previous morning. Furthermore, on the night of April 6th and April 7th, we saw very heavy rain. We saw miserable conditions. We saw the Confederate soldiers individually fanning out to try to find food, to try to find ammunition that'll fit their weapons. Some of them find their units again. Some of them do not. Some of them join other units. Some of them leave and march toward Corinth. So we have a very disorganized situation in the Confederate Army through the night of April 6th to April 7th. Concurrently, General Don Carlos Buell's Union Army of the Ohio is crossing the Tennessee River on steamboats, or coming down the Tennessee River on steamboats from Savannah, depending on which unit. Arriving all night long, organizing themselves for an attack on the eastern side of the battlefield. At the same time, what's left of General Grant's army, being relieved of that long line of battle, when Buell comes in, is able to reorganize themselves along the western part of the battlefield. Significantly for General Grant, the arrival of General Lew Wallace's 3rd Division from Crump. He arrived at about 7 at the night on the night of the 6th, and on the morning of the 7th, Lew Wallace's fresh division laying in line of battle with their artillery support ready to go. So comparing the two armies, you have a fairly well-organized Union Army with a lot of comparatively fresh troops, reinforced, and you have a very disorganized Confederate Army, scattered across the landscape without their organization, completely split up. General Beauregard and the Confederates made very little headway at reorganizing their army through the course of the night. Had very little success at that. And so when dawn came, when morning came, the Confederate Army was surprised to find the Union Army coming toward them, coming across those deep ravines, Tilghman Branch Ravine, and they had to react in an ad hoc fashion. They had to react in a very improvisational fashion. The various formations had to go out and get their troops. Confederate troops had to be pulled from around campfires. They had to fall in. Ad hoc brigades had to be put together. Some understrength brigades that had existed the day before had to be put together. And they were thrown forward into the line just about as soon as they could get together. So what are we going to talk about today once we start walking? Well, we're going to talk about the fighting on the western side of the battlefield, the Confederate left flank. The commander here, General Braxton Bragg, the commander of General Johnston's 2nd Corps, the most experienced Confederate soldiers in Johnston's army. Who was Braxton Bragg? He was born in 1817. Warrenton, North Carolina, attended the United States Military Academy at West Point. I'm not going to give a detailed biography here, but he saw service in the Seminole Wars when he was a young man, and he saw service in the U.S.-Mexican War, 1846, 1847. In the February 1847 Battle of Buena Vista, in northern Mexico, under the command of General Zachary Taylor, Captain Bragg and his battery of light artillery distinguished themselves, made a national name for themselves in a particularly touchy part of that battle when Santa Anna's Mexican infantry was attacking toward the American flank. Captain Bragg's battery of artillery came into battery and dropped trail and started shooting into the advancing Mexican army. They didn't have much defense at the time, much infantry support. General Taylor came over to Captain Bragg to give him a little advice, which is a famous quote from the Battle of Buena Vista. And now I have to quote it correctly.
Mr. Bragg.
Huh?
A little more grape.
A little more grape, if you will, Mr. Bragg. And so they crammed their cannons with grape shot, with canister shot, and fired canister into the oncoming enemy, and eventually drove them back with the assistance of some of the volunteer infantry.
That was the thing that got in the paper, but he said something a little more profane.
He probably said, yes, Zachary Taylor was known to be a little more profane than that gentlemanly quote. But that's how it was written. So Bragg was a well-known and talented officer, a fine artillerist, a fine organizer, and a fine trainer with a good reputation in the old army. In 1856, or thereabouts, he left the army, got a sugar plantation in Louisiana, and there he was running his sugar plantation and growing sugar with his slaves in 1861 when the war started. He came into the Confederate Army. We're going to leap forward to his command in the Gulf. He's in command at Pensacola, in charge of the Gulf Coast defenders there. And when the crisis occurred in early 1862, the capture of Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, and General Johnston's army began retreating down from Kentucky. General Johnston prevailed upon President Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government to send him reinforcements to strip the garrisons of other places, particularly the unthreatened garrisons of the Gulf Coast. And so at that point, Braxton Bragg came up from from the Gulf Coast to join Johnston at Corinth with over 10,000 well-trained, fairly experienced soldiers. When I say fairly experienced, that doesn't mean they'd been in battles. It means that they'd been in service for a year or more. It meant that they'd spent that time in the service drilling, and the officers spent that time in the service learning their duties, and the organizations spent that time working together. So Bragg's Corps at the beginning of the battle was the tightest organization in Johnston's army. Johnston also made Bragg his chief of staff to take charge of that, to take charge of the administrative part of leading the army, and that well suited Bragg's abilities. Fine organizer. We could go on and talk about General Bragg's dyspeptic nature and about how one time in the old army he arrested himself and charged himself with a court-martial. But those are fun stories, but they're not for this morning. Needless to say, he's an aggressive personality, a dyspeptic personality, and probably the least loved Confederate commander of the war. On the morning of April 7th, 1862, when the Confederate Army is spread across the camps, some of them General Polk's Corps, or a portion of General Polk's Corps, as far back as 5 miles, their original campground on the morning of April 6th. Confederates under Beauregard need to quickly organize a defense, and General Beauregard put Bragg in charge of the western side of the battlefield. That doesn't mean that Bragg had any of his well-trained, well-organized Gulf Coast men. He just had whoever was over here. The fact of the matter is, he did have a few. He had some of the men who trained under him, but most of them were from the other corps, the other 3 corps. So Bragg had to make decisions about how to quickly get a line of defense out there, quickly figure out what the enemy was doing, and quickly come up with some sort of countermeasure to these fresh, reinforced Union forces that are moving across Dill Branch, and in our case, Tilghman Branch, to retake by surprise the Union camps. So that gets us to this ground, I think. So let's start off. Let's head straight down. We're going to head straight down this road. We're going to carefully cross Highway 22, and then we're going to head off to the forwardmost Confederate outposts on the morning of April 7th. That covers a lot of terrain. So it's a good program for the morning. We're going to be moving a lot, and we're going to be moving pretty fast. There's going to be a couple of times in the program that we're going to go through the woods off trail. And the exciting part about that is you don't know whether or not I'm capable of finding the marker we're looking for. Some of you are used to that and bored with it, but we'll track them down, and I assure you that even if I don't find the marker, I know what happened there. But also it means that we're going to be doing a fair amount of walking, and our interpretation, our information is going to be a little more general. A little more general. A lot of times I love telling more involved stories and personal stories and stuff like that happened at the place. We're not going to really have too much time for that, because what we're trying to do is get our minds around how the Confederates organized this ad hoc defense on the west side of the battlefield, and some of the problems that they encountered during that, and how they at least succeeded in defending, although in time the Federals drove them back. Where we are now, the location of 3 regiments, or 3 units of Colonel Preston Pond's 3rd Brigade of Ruggles 1st Division from Bragg's Corps. So these are some of Bragg's men from the Gulf Coast. They had come up from New Orleans. In response to General Johnston's call for help. During the Battle of the 6th, Pond's brigade had been responsible for keeping contact with Owl Creek, on the west side of the battlefield. Now, that's a pretty tough assignment because there's some nasty old ravines back up over in there. There's some wetland, there's some deep ravines, there's all sorts of terrain to deal with. So in spite of the fact that they didn't have too much opposition from federal defenders to deal with, Pond's brigade spent most of the 6th sort of crawling along the western side of the battlefield. A lot of times they might be skirmishing with some federal sharpshooters and federal cavalry maybe. But until later in the afternoon, they didn't have too much heavy combat. But later in the afternoon, they did, when the Confederate Army was starting to flank toward the Hornet's Nest, when they're starting to move through even the southern part of this field, moving more easterly instead of northerly, that's when Pond's brigade faced more to the east, including their battery of artillery, and moved down into Tilghman's Branch. And then at about 4:30 in the afternoon of April 6th, they launched an attack out of a feeder branch down there in Tilghman up toward one of General McClernand's last lines. And that attack was disastrous for the Confederates that participated in it. They lost very heavily, including most heavily among that 18th Louisiana Regiment under Colonel Alfred Mouton, pretty purely Acadian regiment from the western part of Mississippi, Louisiana. Lost very heavily, retreated back to this position, and by that time almost all the rest of the Confederate infantry had proceeded to the Hornet's Nest area and were gobbling up prisoners. So after the retreat from Pond's attack, Pond's brigade was the only Confederate infantry on this part of the battlefield. There was some Confederate cavalry operating between here and Owl Creek, and Pond's battery was in 2 positions over here to our east. And so this is where Pond bivouacked on the night of the 6th. The vast majority of the Confederate Army is more than a mile that way in Union camps, but Pond's people are here and they are on guard. Early on the morning of April 7th, they immediately were engaged by artillery from General Lew Wallace's Union Division, which is directly across Tilghman Branch Ravine. And through the course of the morning, as the tablet tells us, they occupied this position. The General Wallace was moving very conservatively. At about 6:30 in the morning, he moved down into Tilghman Branch Ravine, and then it wasn't until about 9 that he felt that he could move up out of it. He was waiting for, according to him, he was waiting for General Sherman to get ready. General Sherman was waiting for someone else to get ready. Finally, at about 9, the whole Union line moved slowly, ponderously, through the deep and muddy Tilghman Branch Ravine. And at that time, without offering too much resistance, because they were alone out here, Pond retreated back to the other side of this field. Let's move along over here. He kind of confused when the Confederate order about it. I think the weren't there to get it because they lost the election.
Bjorn.
Yes.
Who was the Confederate cavalry over there?
It's still Brewer, isn't it? Early in the morning, when the sharpshooters come across. We talked about that a couple years ago, and I forgot. I should have. I think it's Morgan. Huh?
Morgan has a tablet over there.
Morgan has a tablet over there, so Morgan's squadron is part of it. I'm thinking Brewer. Thinking Brewer's Alabama. Yeah.
In their history, they're more back.
Mm-hmm.
Colonel Morgan's more back over there.
Who's more? Morgan's back over there.
He
Yeah.
is not up this far.
Not much to see here, but we want to make sure this is Ketchum's Alabama battery, and they play a big part in the fighting of this day.
You know what cannons they were armed with?
I do not. Sorry about that. What's that?
It was this time.
No. Very few of the cannons on the battlefield are the same type as the cannon used at that point at that time. But yeah, Ketchum's battery went into battery here. 4 of their guns. I think 4 of their guns here and 2 of their guns a few hundred yards this way. On the evening of the 6th, they had quite a spirited artillery duel with Captain Edward Boughton's Battery I, 1st Illinois Light Artillery. That's Grant's last line on the other side of the ravine. And Ketchum's guys got the best of that particular duel. It's kind of amusing to read Captain Boughton's memoirs about how the Confederates concentrated 3 different batteries against my battery, and we were finally overwhelmed with all of that. In fact, it was an even fight. It was just that Ketchum was in 2 different spots, and Boughton thought that he was being shot at from left and right and all over the place. But Ketchum stayed in this position until the next morning. And part of the reason that Wallace and Sherman are so conservative in launching this attack, several reasons. An important one is that the Union forces are very conservative about remaining together and organized and in a straight line. Nobody moves until everybody else is ready to move. That's an important one, but the other important one is artillery and the appreciation of the Union commanders of the effectiveness of artillery in defense, the effectiveness of close-range artillery against infantry in defense, an appreciation for that canister shot, that grape from Buena Vista that Captain Bragg was sending at Santa Ana. And so early in the morning, Ketchum is able to engage Union batteries on the other side of Tilghman Branch. And they're at least able to make it seem like there's a strong Confederate line right here on the lip of the opposite, on the other side of the ravine. The ravine is terrible. The ravine is deep. The ravine is filled with mud. And if it's well defended and you try to go, anyone would try to attack up the side of that, that would be a very bloody failure. So the Wallace and Sherman are going to be conservative about that, in combination with their desire to make sure that everything is well organized before they go forward. So until 9 in the morning, like as I said before, by about 6:30, Wallace felt he was ready to go, but it was 9 in the morning before they crossed the ravine and actually got up here, and about that time before Ketchum had to limber up his guns and head for the rear with Colonel Pond's brigade. Yeah, question.
I know the battlefield is quite different now than it was then, but
Yeah.
have heard in years past you say lots of times all these trees were not there.
That is the case with this area.
Okay, they weren't here.
Yeah, first of all, Jones Field itself extended further toward the ravine.
Right.
So it was completely open.
Okay.
And then up toward the lip of the ravine, yeah, it would have been more open, open old growth forest. And so, yeah, Ketchum you could have seen the park entrance from where we're standing right now at the time, where Thurber's battery is. And Ketchum could have seen them and sent shots their way. All right, let's head on back. So I'm trying to get Bragg's line untangled. But I do want, this is a good vantage point, and I want to point some things out. If we turn around and look back behind us now, the lines of tablets that we moved through coming this way, you can see they're all oval, looking at the back side of them, and those represent the line that General Lew Wallace took after he crossed Tilghman Branch, and it stretched on out toward Owl Creek there. And from that position until about 10 in the morning, they engaged in artillery practice against Confederate artillerists in the wood line back here. We're going to go look at that. Also, I want to draw your attention to the oval tablets that move along this ridge line. In this area, they belong to General Sherman's division. The cause for that, it looks like if Wallace was right there, Wallace would have moved right up here. But Sherman came across, took his position in line of battle. Wallace moved one of his brigades further toward Owl Creek. Don't want to get too much into what the Federals are facing, but you know, Owl Creek flows from a southwesterly to a northeasterly direction. So every step the Union Army takes in their counterattack, their flank moves farther and farther to their right. And the same problem that Pond encountered the day before, in the morning before, that he was stuck way out on the left while the Army went and did something else. Now Wallace has to stay attached to Owl Creek. So Wallace actually is moving more that way. He's shifting his brigades, and he's moving one to the left and the right, and then back, and all sorts of things like that happen. But Sherman comes up, he takes position there, and then he quickly moves forward to this position, and this is the position that the Union line of battle at about 10 o'clock in the morning. About an hour after Pond left his position, and the battle is now starting to actually generate. It's now starting to actually get going. And so if you look at each of these oval tablets, each of them represents, in most cases, a brigade of infantry. Now think in terms of how close those tablets are together. If that brigade was at anywhere close to its full strength, how much frontage do you think it would need? A normal brigade at full strength would probably cover the entire ground between that tree line over there and this tree line over here. At least half of it. And now it takes Sherman's entire division plus parts of McClernand's division, which are moving up on his left, just to cover the frontage of the field. Such were the losses on the day before. One more thing before we head out. Did anyone participate in the Chicago Light Artillery at Shiloh program a couple years ago? I know a lot of you like to come every year. And so on that we followed the Willard's Battery on the first day of the battle. The Battery A, 1st Illinois Light Artillery, commanded by Captain Peter Wood. At the end of the first day of the battle, that 6-gun battery was able to muster only 3 guns. And on that night, the Sherman's Chief of Artillery, Captain Ezra Taylor, was given permission to take any battery from Illinois that he wanted and attach it to General Sherman's division the next day. And Taylor chose Lieutenant Peter Wood's remnant of Battery A, 1st Illinois Light Artillery. Such was his esteem for that unit, that even though it had been chopped in half, he would rather have that battery than any other battery from Illinois participate in Sherman's attack on that day. Of course, these guys belonged to Wallace's division, Will Wallace's division. But from the morning that Taylor chose them to join Sherman's division, they were never again out of Sherman's command. There until their muster out in 1860. So they were quite an effective battery. They did very effective work here, and their 3 guns did effective work at this position, and then advancing toward the Confederates during the rest of the afternoon. That's all for the Yankees. I just wanted to make sure we knew where they were. Let's start talking about Bragg's defense. To get Wallace and Sherman to get across Tilghman Branch Ravine, the time it took them to figure out that Pond was not there in force and could not have seriously resisted them, that time was improved by General Bragg in getting some of these ad hoc defenses together. He was able to find some of his own troops, but he had to get others from elsewhere. Up here on top of the hill, a couple of regiments of Gladden's brigade, who were chopped up over there in Spainfield on the morning of April 6th, now under the command of Colonel Zachariah Dees. And he was able to find them. They were camped back somewhere back here, and he was able to bring them forward into line, his own troops. Here, members of General Polk's Corps. Most of General Polk's Corps marched 5 miles out, or most of General Cheatham's division of Polk's Corps marched way back to their starting point before the Battle of April 6th. And then on the morning of April 7th, they had to quickly get into line and march all the way back to the battlefield. Here, the 6th and 9th Tennessee Infantry from Stevens' brigade of Cheatham's Corps come up, and they tie into the left of two regiments from Gladden's brigade, and this is what their position is going to be in the line of battle. Mona?
Why did they backtrack 5 miles previous camp?
I don't know for sure. I think it was because that was where their camp was. I'm sure they left their blankets and their tents, and without any other instructions, let's go back to our camp.
So they didn't.
And and Cheatham may well have had the same delusion that Beauregard had. Well, we won. This battle's over. We won. Let's go back to our camp. I don't know, though. That's speculation. Let's move off here, and there's a line of similar tablets that goes through the woods. Next unit in the line of battle, 33rd Tennessee from Stewart's brigade of Polk's Corps. So now we have, you can still see the road, obviously, from where we are. We've already had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different regiments belonging to 3 different brigades. And also 3 different divisions, although those division orders of battle have fallen apart by this time. So at about the 10 o'clock line includes this stray 33rd Tennessee Infantry from Stewart's brigade. General Stewart and the rest of his brigade are elsewhere on the battlefield. The Polk's Corps, Russell's brigade. So once again, the 33rd Tennessee, their commander has no idea who's on his right, he has no idea who's on his left, and 12th Tennessee doesn't know anything about 33rd Tennessee. Now the next 3 regiments, the 12th, 13th, and the 22nd, they're all under Colonel Milton Russell. And so Russell is able to probably control a comparatively large portion of the battle line in this area, and they will fight in this direction.
My great grandfather was in the Corps.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. Do you know whether he was on duty on the 7th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know he was.
Really? Then he would have been here. Further out. I think they were further out to the west, weren't they?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was certainly a
Tree line here?
the tree line. Yeah, I think it was a little further to the west. I think the Confederate line of battle was pretty much in the tree line.
Those trees weren't there at all.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know that for sure, but I don't think so.
Question about horses.
Yeah.
With all this movement of artillery, it seemed like you better have your horses close by. And the horses I've had experience with would go berserk with all this shooting going on. And my understanding from Civil War people is some horses could handle it and some couldn't.
I suppose.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, but the horses can be trained. So you're talking about a battery of artillery. These Union guns right here would have had their limbers standing about maybe 100 yards to the rear of the cannon. And the 6 horses would have been attached to each limber. And somewhat to the rear of the limbers would have been the caissons with the reserve ammunition and 6 horses attached to each of those. So a Union artillery battery with 6 guns has 72 horses just to get them wherever they're going. Each team at full strength, when the battery's at full strength, each team has a horse holder. Each pair has a horse holder. And so somebody's job in the battle is to stand with his back to the enemy and hold horses. Yeah. But if you're asking me why they didn't bolt, my answer is a lot of times they did. And other times, if they were well trained enough, if the horse holders were up to their job, they could be held there. No doubt they were terrified.
Somebody once told me that some horses can just handle all that banging going on, and others go
can't.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really wondered.
Yeah.
But hey, Bjorn,
What's
horses,
go crazy don't last very long.
right,
Yeah.
horses like that back then, like men at that time, men are different now than they were back then too. And the horses were bred to be work horses. They weren't bred to be pleasure horses. So they were more bred for going to be genetically trained to do that.
Genetically trained to
Be work horses.
be workhorses and pull things.
And the quartermaster department kind of recruited those kind of horses.
Yeah.
So they kind of knew what to look for.
So they wouldn't be as interested in a racehorse.
No. And the race horses, the thoroughbreds then, like that Morgan squadron had, are not the thoroughbreds of today.
Okay.
They weren't as hot-blooded. They still were fast and would move, but
They weren't as hot-blooded as
they weren't as calm.
Okay.
You
I
couldn't
shot
take
a-
a racehorse now and do what they did back then with thoroughbreds.
Right.
Well, I shot a .22 rifle off the back of a horse one time. It took about half a mile to get him calmed down.
The reenactors have cowboy horses. They have to train them and teach to them. And some don't work out, some do, but if they don't work out, well, you have to sell them somewhere else.
Okay. We're going to head on out, but I want to watch. That's the back end of the tablet denoting the location of General Sterling A.M. Wood's brigade. Wood belongs to Hardee's Corps. So, in compliance with the pattern we've established, every brigade in the line of battle is unfamiliar with every other brigade in the line of battle. Sort of an obtuse angle. It moves off in that direction, and then following the wood line, it's going to move off in this direction. Here is where the Confederates used artillery to severely slow the already tentative Union advance. This is Smith's, a section of Smith's artillery battery is here. And during the course of the morning, they're going to carry on an artillery duel with those batteries in Wallace's brigade that you can still see there. They can see the battery positions right on top of the rise over there by Ogilvy's headquarters. So while the infantry is standing or laying in line of battle in the hopes of avoiding artillery, unable to respond themselves to defend themselves, during this period, the 9 to 10 period, you have a pretty heavy artillery duel going across this open field. And while the artillery duel is going on, Bragg is getting these guys organized on the left and bringing them up. While this artillery duel is going on, Colonel Bob Shaver is able to bring three of his regiments forward into this area to the right of Smith's battery. These are Arkansas troops. These are troops that were engaged in the first battle against Prentice's division on the morning of April 6th. At about 2:30 in the afternoon of April 6th, they launched one of the many unsupported attacks into the Hornet's Nest position, straight up that Eastern Corinth Road. They're badly chewed up in that attack on the Hornet's Nest. They fell back that night. They found rations. They slept in Yankee tents. And early the next morning, someone from Bragg's Corps, perhaps one of his staff officers, found them, got them into this line of battle, and by 10:30 in the morning, Shaver's brigade was in position here. Now, who participated in the Program yesterday morning, Henry Morton Stanley sees the Civil War. Okay, 1, 2, 3. About half of you were on, a little more than half of you were on the Stanley hike. For those of you who weren't on the hike, we don't have time to fill you in on it, but if you're familiar with the phrase Dr. Livingston, I presume, from the great African adventurer Henry Morton Stanley, he was here at Shiloh, a 19-year-old Confederate private in the 6th Arkansas Regiment. Yesterday we walked across the southern part of the battlefield in the footsteps of Henry Morton Stanley, reading his memoir as we went along, his memories of the Battle of Shiloh. And he left some very gripping accounts of the battle on the first day. I didn't bring him with me today, but I'd remind you he's in the 6th Arkansas Regiment. He was on duty, and if you look at that tablet, you'll find that the 6th Arkansas Regiment is posted on the right flank of Shaver's brigade. So, on the morning of April 7th, Stanley is in line of battle over here to my left. Let's head this direction.
One more thing about Stanley, because I think we'd like to see those of us who were on the program yesterday like to know the rest of the story.
He wrote his memoir about 40 years after the battle, and what he said and what matches up with where we're standing right now shows that he had a remarkably acute memory of what happened that day. Even fact-checking what happens right here helps to establish the veracity of his memoir when you're talking about the battle in Review Field or the battle at Prentice's camps. On the morning of April 7th, Stanley remembered coming into line of battle, and his company was assigned duty as skirmishers. So they would have to run out in front of the line of battle, stand about 6 feet from each other, more spread out than a Civil War line usually is, and then go forward and find the enemy. Stanley recalled that as he was moving into position, his captain, I should take a step back. He had already enlisted in the Army because he was afraid that the girls wouldn't think he was manly. Someone sent him a petticoat when he didn't enlist at first. Then on the morning of Shiloh, he underwent this sort of change and underwent that incredible trying experience. On the morning of the 7th, as his company is running forward to take their position as skirmishers, his captain happens to mention in an offhand manner, "Step quickly now, Mr. Stanley," which Stanley interpreted to mean, what? You don't think I'm brave? You don't think I'm up to my job? You don't think I'm as good a soldier as all my comrades? And then he said they went forward. The skirmishers went forward out of the woods, and he took cover in a small ravine, just a few hundred feet in front of the line of battle. And there we go. We have Stanley's Ravine right in front of us. 40 years later, he remembered the topography perfectly. He remembered the topography perfectly because he said he ran forward into the ravine, crawled up to the other side, and the Union skirmishers, you can see McClernand's division is starting to mount the bluff of Tilghman Branch. You can see the backside of their oval tablets heading this way. The Union skirmishers were starting to approach that ravine, and Stanley and a few of his comrades were popping off at those skirmishers pretty intensely, and Stanley neglected to pay attention. He didn't hear the order, and after a few minutes of fighting, he turned around. The skirmish line was gone. He looked back, and his company were all gone back into the woods, and at that moment, I don't know exactly what they said, but it was something to the effect of, "Surrender, you damned rebel, we've got you." And from that position, from that little ravine, Henry Morton Stanley, Private Henry Morton Stanley of the 6th Arkansas, was captured and taken to the rear. And the rest of his story, you'll have to read about it in his memoir. But it does involve Camp Douglas, and then galvanizing and becoming a Yankee, and then joining the Union Navy, and then going to the Mideast, and then going to Africa and finding Dr. Livingstone, and then becoming a Victorian chancellor of an African colony. It all is very interesting stuff. But that was the last time he was ever at Shiloh, marching off in that direction as a prisoner of war. Here we have the 4th Tennessee Infantry, from Stewart's Brigade, and indeed the 33rd Tennessee is the next regiment of Stewart's Brigade, which is all the way over in those woods. Okay. See. At this position, Bragg is able to order forward Patrick Cleburne's brigade, again from Hardee's Corps. Now at about 10:30 in the morning, the bombardment over here in Jones Field is becoming very intense. And at about 10:30 in the morning, all of that Confederate line of battle that we traced, which you can still see the bright area above Jones Field, just a few hundred yards from where we are. That entire line of battle surged forward to meet the advancing Union division of General John A. McClernand. General Wallace was still in position on the Union right, the Confederate left. General Sherman was still in position, and as McClernand came into the field, they made a bit of an L, and the Confederates charged right into that area. In fact, they charged at an oblique angle. Probably would have been easier to talk about it back there since we had the field, across the front of the Union artillery. And so it turned out to be a very ill-considered choice to make that charge. All of those Confederate units, under strength and exhausted, charged right into a concentration of artillery and infantry fire. They stood there. That was about the time that old Stanley was moving out into the field there. Those Confederates met an intense concentration of fire. They suffered severe casualties, and they were thrown back into the forest. And a lot of the units ceased to exist right then and there. A lot of those Confederates in that line of battle, made up of small, disorganized, disjointed units from the previous days, a lot of those sole survivors decided they'd have enough, and they headed for the rear. At least one of the regiments in Shaver's brigade was totally out of ammunition and couldn't get any more, and kept getting orders to attack or stand here. And indeed, they headed off to, eventually they melted away too. A failure of morale. The Confederate commanders failed to keep their men to their work. At that point, at about that same time, Cleburne's brigade, on the morning of April 6th, Cleburne's brigade was the largest single brigade in the Confederate Army. Patrick Cleburne had about 2,700 men in his line of battle when he attacked Sherman's line at Shiloh Church. Due to very heavy casualties and straggling, some of his regiments were new. On the morning of April 7th, he charged up to this position with 800 men. The remnants of the 24th Tennessee, Hill's 5th Tennessee, the 15th Arkansas, and the 23rd Tennessee. They took position here, including, as you can see, stretching off into these ravines. with the men down in the ravine, particularly the people over here, they were exposed to Union fire from the top of the ravine. General Hurlbut's, the remnants of General Hurlbut's Union division were advancing through the woods over there. And it was a bloody fight. General Claiborne had to have his men go to ground in order to let Girardi's battery duel with the Union battery across the top of their heads. And then after fighting for some time, I believe, this is a detail I probably need to check with you, I believe Claiborne went to the rear looking for orders. When he returned to this position, he said there were only 58 men left. He had suffered a lot of casualties, but in his absence, without his personal supervision of his brigade, his men melted away to the rear, searching for safety to the rear. So by 10:30 in the morning, General Bragg's line is crumbling. It's crumbling as a result of exhaustion, and it's crumbling as a result of casualties, and it's crumbling as a result of disorganization. And
Lack of ammunition.
and lack of ammunition, as we see here. And that goes against at least one of the stories that you hear a lot about Shiloh, and that's the assumption that on the evening of April 6th, the Confederates were able to fall back to the Union camps and get all the ammunition that they needed. There was no guarantee when they fell back to those camps that the ammunition that they found would fit their weapons. And even as they tried to find ammunition, they would have to travel all over the battlefield, all over the camps, in the darkness, in the night. They may or may not ever find their, even if they find ammunition, they may or may not ever find their unit again. So by 10:30 in the morning, the ammunition is running dry, the morale is running low, and the Federals are really starting to slowly grind that attack forward. And the prospects for General Bragg's 10:30 line are reduced to a very low order of probability that they will hold this line.
Orientation here. So Claiborne's facing this direction.
Yes?
My impression is that the Yankees, that Wallace and Sherman are trying to come that way. Am I mistaken then?
Yes. The Union line of battle stretched from Pittsburgh Landing west to almost the Snake Creek Bridge, following the line of the Park Entrance Road. As they moved forward, the right of their line had to keep extending. It's part of why it's taking a long time. And then they also have to deal with a Confederate line of battle. Pond's resistance is very far forward, and so is the left of Bragg's army. And then the rest of Bragg's line heads back in this direction in order to connect with Breckinridge. Now, once Buell crossed Dill Branch, he also moved forward ponderously, but he moved forward much more quickly than Sherman and Wallace. So while Sherman and Wallace are engaged in crossing Dill Branch and engaging in a artillery duel across that line, Buell is actually starting to move forward, grind forward. By 10:30 in the morning, when this battle happens, Buell is fighting in the Peach Orchard area and all along the Hamburg-Purdy Road. So the line of battle swings a little bit like a door in the opposite direction as the day before, at least through the 10:30 line of battle. Now, I'm going to quickly wrap up our topic to this point. Bragg was able to whip his guys into line of battle. We've had it demonstrated that it was a thin line of battle made up of exhausted soldiers. The commanders did not know each other. They made this desperate attempt to make an attack. It was ill-considered, They suffered heavily out there in Jones Field. Claiborne's brigade was chopped up here, and then by the 10:30 to 11 o'clock, they are fleeing back toward the Hamburg-Purdy Road, where they will rally and form the next major Confederate line of battle along the Hamburg-Purdy Road and in the Water Oaks Pond area. The reason I bring the program to a halt at this point, or bring it to a conclusion at this point, is that the next program, our program is scheduled to end in 1 hour. The next program, I guess I left it in my car. The next program should be scheduled to begin shortly after that. If we continue the program, the fast marching program that I planned, then we're going to charge off through the woods and find Gibson's tablet, and then we're going to find Anderson's tablet, then we're going to go all the way to Duncan Field. Then we're going to come back along the road and come back to our cars. By my estimation, that should take more than an hour. And so I intend to go if anybody wants to go with me. But I will not be able to get you back to your car. No promises getting you back to your car at 10:30. If you want to get back to the cars, and you want to see another program this morning, by all means, no offense taken. I think we've learned a lot so far. What you could do is follow this park trail right back up to Sherman Road, the paved road, turn right, take it into Jones Field, go through the woods, backtracking our program, cross Highway 22, and you'll be at your cars. Is there anyone who's thinking of doing that? It is a good idea if you want to make the next program. Okay. Do those directions sound good to you?
Oh, I know.
And you can find your way back to Jones Field.
Yeah, I've walked this. This is my troops right here.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll see you on your next tour.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah. Our next goal is Gibson's brigade tablet, who are the next Confederates in the line of battle.